So we're on to 2.1, use integers and rational numbers. So first we have whole numbers, which are, they just start at 0 and then they go up 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But integers, we have some stuff, and then we have like -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Positive integers are greater than 0. Negative integers are less than 0. So have a number line. Something like this. Then on this side, we have the positive integers. And then on this side, we would have the negative integers. So then, next thing we have are rational numbers. Which is a number, something like a over b, where a and b are integers. The only restriction is that b cannot be equal to 0. And ultimately we have real numbers, which make up all of these types of numbers listed above. Or maybe I said that backwards, but to give you kind of a visual of this, we've got real numbers. Then within that, we have rational numbers. Then in there, we have integers. And then the last one inside is that we have then whole numbers. So then, as part of the rational numbers, we need to determine if it repeats or terminates. So a terminating decimal would be something like 3/4. And I was thinking of this as like quarters. So if I have 3/4, the 4 make up $1, so 3 would be 75 cents. So this would be 0.75. So that one would be terminating because it stops. But a repeating decimal if we had 1/3 would be 0.3333 and so on. So it just keeps going. So a lot of this section is going to be like put the numbers on a number line, and then it'll say something like tell if it's a rational number, an integer, whole number. And then it may ask you if it's a repeating or terminating decimal, if that applies. All right, and then absolute value. I always call this, or say when I hear this, distance from 0. Because what absolute value does is it makes everything positive. So it's a matter of how far away is it from 0. So it officially, this is what I always say is distance from 0. But what your book says is of a number A, so the absolute value of a number A, and it would be written something like this, is the distance between A and 0 on a number line. So if you had the absolute value of 3, okay, on the number line you're looking at 3, how far is that from 0? So you would count 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, so it would be 3 away. If you had -3, you're just counting backwards, but it's still a positive value because it's just the distance from 0, and we can't have negative distance, so it's 1, 2, 3, so it'd be 3 away. We also have conditional statements, which you may have heard about in science class at some point. If you haven't yet, you will. But these are also called if-then statements. The if part is the hypothesis. The then part is the conclusion. So, since you're both involved with volleyball, and we've had our games canceled the last few days, if the weather is bad, then we will cancel our volleyball games. That would be an if-then statement. So we are saying if the weather's bad, so that's the hypothesis, then the volleyball game is canceled, then that would be that part of it. That would be the conclusion. Words not working. So I'm going to give you a few conditional statements dealing with absolute value, just to help see some examples of those, and then also just to help along the way. So, absolute value of a number. So I'm going to do it first in words, and then I'll do an example to go with it mathematically of what it's talking about. So the first one, if A is positive, then the absolute value of A is equal to A. So an example of this, if we had the absolute value of 2, it would be equal to 2. Next one, if A is 0, then the absolute value of A is equal to 0. And the only way for this one to be true is if we have something like the absolute value of 0 is equal to 0. The other one, it could be any number, any positive number, I should say. And then lastly, if A is negative, then this is a little bit misleading. The absolute value of A is equal to negative A. But I would say that this really should be the absolute value of negative A is equal to A is really how that should be written. For it to not be so confusing. But an example is if you have the absolute value of negative 2, they're saying that the reason they're writing it this way is they're saying it's negative times negative 2, which would just be positive 2. But I would say, if I were to actually be doing it, the absolute value of negative 2 is equal to 2, because the negative sign just goes away with the absolute value. So I'm just going to put a little line through this, and I would go with what's written in green so it's less confusing. Not that what they have is wrong, it's just a little bit more confusing, so. All right, so some examples. These say to graph the numbers on a number line and then tell which number is greater. So, number 6, we have 0 and negative 4. So negative numbers are always going to be on the left, and they start at negative, whatever the, it sounds crazy, but like the bigger negative number. So like negative 10 would be before negative 7, okay, left to right. So when we have our line, 0, 1, 2, 3, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. So we're just going to put these points on this number line. So We have 0. We have -4. And it wants to know which one is the biggest one. Okay, which number is greater? The greater number is always going to be the one on the number line farthest to the right. Okay, so in this case, the greatest one is going to be 0. The biggest mistake I usually see is that people forget that, like, the negative numbers work backwards. So it should almost, like when you're looking in a mirror, how like whatever you're doing with your right is actually on the left. If you were to take your number line and fold it in half, your numbers should line up. So like you start at 0 being the hinge, and then you have 1 on the right side, -1 on the left, matched up. And then +2 and -2 are lining up. So that way we don't get that mixed up. Number 8. -2 and -3. And you don't necessarily have to put a ton of numbers on your number line. You could just go out to like a couple on each side just to make it look pretty, I guess. So we have -2 and -3 on here, so we just put a point at each one. And which one's going to be the bigger one in this case?
-2.
Yep, -2. Always the one farthest to the right. All right, let's see number 10. So number 10, oops, I definitely drew my line before I told you what the problem was. -12 and 8. And if you want to like count by 2s or something with one like this, since it's kind of big, you can. So I'm going to count by 2s and just make sure you label. So I've got -12, so I'm going all the way left to -12, then all the way to right to +8. So what's the biggest number on this one?
8.
8. Feel okay with those ones? Okay, so the next ones, it's kind of the same thing, but instead of telling which one is the biggest, we're going to label each number as either a whole number, an integer, or a rational number. Okay. Now, technically, whole numbers are also integers. So you could, even if you wanted to, you could just say positive or negative integer instead of whole number. If you want, I don't care one way or the other how you want to do it. But yeah. And then it says it wants us to order them from least to greatest. I think the easiest way to do that is just to mark them on a number line, honestly. So I think we should just keep with that trend. And then on the number line, we can actually just draw like a little line, and we can say like, oh, this is a positive integer. Okay, is what we'll do for these ones. That way it saves a little bit of space on your paper too. So let's start with 14. We have the number 3, -5, -2.4, and 1. So some of these may be fractions, some of these may be decimals mixed in. So we'll talk about those. But let's get a number line going here. So then you're just going to put the points on there. So we have 3, so that one's just going on the 3. -5, going over to -5. Now the negative 2.4, okay, where would that one fall?
In the middle of 3 and 2.
Yep. So it's going to be about in the middle here of the negative 3 and negative 2. And then the last one is 1. So what is negative 5? Whole number, integer, or rational number?
Negative integer.
Negative integer, so you can just put a dash if you want and do negative integer. What is the negative 2.4?
Negative integer.
So integers have to be numbers that are just like, they can't have decimals or fractions. So which ones are the decimals and fractions ones?
Rational.
Yep, rational. Then 1.
A whole number.
Okay, whole number. Or if you want, you can also say positive integer. Either way. And 3.
Whole number.
Whole number. So the nice thing about doing them on the number line is they're already ordered least to greatest for you. And so if I were to ask you to do that on like a quiz or a test, this would be a sufficient way for you to answer that question for me. So, all right, 16. So it's got several decimals in it. 0.25 minus 0.5, 0.2, and minus 2. All right, so where does the 0.25 go?
In the middle of 1 and 0.
Yep. So it's going to be right there. What about minus 0.5?
Between the negative 1 and 0.
It's going to be right here. How about 0.2? Is it going to the left or the right of 0.25?
To the right.
So imagine this was money. Is 20 cents bigger than 25 cents? Imagine this had a 0 on the end of it. Which one would you rather have? 1/4 or 2 dimes?
2 dimes.
You only want 20 cents, not 25 cents. So it's going to go to the left. Just by a little bit. And then negative 2, obviously that goes on its point. So then we need to label the numbers. So what is negative 2? Negative integer. What is minus 0.5? Rational. And then what is 0.2 and 0.25? Huh? Yeah. Yes. And if you want, you can just draw a little like arrow to both of them, and then you can just write at one time then, since they're so close to each other. Now, obviously, if one of them was like 0.75 and the other one was 1, you would have to write them separately because they're not the same thing. But since those two are the same, you can just draw a little arrow to them. All right, 18. We've got minus 0.01. Then we have 0.1. Then we have 0. And then we have minus 1/10. So since I'm dealing with decimals and all of them but 1, I'm going to make the minus 1/10 a decimal. So do you know what 1/10 would be as a decimal? Or any guesses? I'll give you a hint. It's one of them that's already written up there, but I won't tell you if it's the one that the sign is right on or not. So is it 0.01 or 0.1? 0.1, is that what you said? So I'm gonna cross this out and write this as minus 0.1 just so that it's easier to think about when I'm going through and graphing. So if I wanted to think about this in terms of money, okay, just because I think sometimes that helps a little bit. Trying to get it. So 0.01 is going to be 1 penny. Okay, so it's going to be 1 cent. Okay. 0.1, that would be a dime, so that's going to be 10 cents. Obviously 0 is just 0. And the last one is 0.1, which would be 10 cents, so it would be a dime, so minus 10 cents. So I have minus 1 cent, I have 10 cents, I have no cents, and I have minus 10 cents. Okay, so I'm going to think about it that way when I go to put it on the thing, but I'm going to use the decimals when I actually graph it, but this is just going to help me to think about them in terms of where they go. So 0, and since I don't have anything bigger than 1, I'm going to make these areas pretty big. So minus 0.01, so if that's 1 cent, okay, then it would be pretty close to 0. So it would be somewhere in here. Then 0.1, that's going to be on the other side, a little bit farther down, so 0.1 somewhere in here. Then I have 0. I'm actually going to do that one a different color just so that they don't run together. And then I have minus 0.1, so that one is just going to be the opposite of this one, so it's just going to be over here. So minus 0.1 and minus 0.01 are what kind of numbers? Rational. So again, since they're basically beside each other, I can just draw an arrow to both of them and lump them together. What is 0? Whole number. You could also just say an integer. 0 is a number that's not positive or negative. It's funny, sometimes I'll ask like my other classes, I'll be like, all right, so 0 positive or negative? And they're like, positive. And I'm like, nope, it's neither. So you'll be ready when you get me later on and I ask you that question. And what would 0.1 be? Rational. All right, I'm going to have y'all try this one on your own first, and then we'll go over it. So this one is minus 2.7. 1/2, 0.3, and -7. So I'm going to let y'all try that one, and this will be the last one that we do for today. We'll save the absolute value for tomorrow. All right, so where does the -2.7 go?
In between -3 and -2.
Yep. How about 1/2?
Between the 0 and 1.
Yep, between 0 and 1. It's halfway between there. How about 0.3?
Between the 0 and 1.
On the left side or the right side of the half?
On the left.
Yep, left side. And then -7. Oh, it just goes on it, right? All right, so then what is -7? Negative integer. What is -2.7? Rational. What is, let's see, 0.3 was the next one. What's 0.3?
Rational.
And what about the half?
Rational.
Rational, so we can just do both of those as rational. Okay, so based on what we've done so far, let's see, 5 through (17) odd.